Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Phantom of the Rubens, and we have today Julien Domercq, who is a curator at the Royal Academy of Art, 18th, 19th century and old master paintings. He was born in Paris, but he studied in Cambridge, and his PhD dissertation was specializing in the representation of the Pacific people in the 18th and 19th century paintings. Prior to his curatorial position in the Royal Academy of Art, he was a curator at National Gallery and Dallas Museum of Art. Julian also curated such shows as Van Gogh and Kiefer at the Royal Academy, as well as Michelangelo, Da Vinci and Raphael at the Royal Academy, as well as Radical Harmony, which has now just opened in a National Gallery, as well as Van Gogh Poets and Lovers in a National Gallery, and also post-impressionist Julian. Congratulations on so many shows, and it's such a pleasure having you here.
Thank you, Daria. It's a pleasure to be here.
I would like to talk a bit more about the show that just opened in a National Gallery of Helena Kröller-Müller collection, and to ask you how the show came together.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's an exhibition that was very much a labor of love. It's a show I started working on when I was working at the National Gallery, right off the back of an exhibition that we did in 2023 called After Impressionism, Inventing Modern Art. And the exhibition very much came out of the opportunity to borrow from the Kröller-Müller Museum in Otterlo, which is a great museum to the east of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and to really collaborate with them to create an exhibition on neo-impressionist paintings. So it was really the opportunity to borrow really the greatest works of neo-impressionism from a collection which to me is really the greatest collection of neo-impressionism in the world. And so use that as a sort of core to build around to create an exhibition.
And what were the challenges creating such an exhibition?
I suppose, I mean, there are always many challenges creating an exhibition. I mean, you got loan negotiation, you always don't have enough time, you often don't have enough space. They're the things you want to get that you cannot get. Though I must say with this exhibition, we really got what we wanted. I think, to me, maybe the biggest challenge of this project in particular was that I was really trying to tell a new story of neo-impressionism. You know, it's the first neo-impressionist exhibition in the National Gallery of it as an exhibition about the group of artists that call themselves the neo-impressionists. And the challenge to me was to create a new story that wasn't the usual story of neo-impressionism, and that very much comes out of the works that we were borrowing from the collection of Helena Kröller-Müller, which is a great collection of neo-impressionist art, not only because she has one of Seurat's greatest paintings, Chahut, some great works by Paul Signac, but also because it is a collection that sees neo-impressionism as an international movement, having an equal number of French artists, but also of Belgians and Dutch artists. And so the challenge was, how do we use this collection as the starting point to tell this story of neo-impressionism as an international movement, and tell it not by grouping all the French artists together and then going to the Belgians and then going to the Dutch, which is a story that's been told before just a few times in a few exhibitions, but it always feels a bit like you're telling a derivative story. You're like, well, it's about the French, the great creators of this thing, and then it goes to Belgium, and then it sort of peters out into insignificance when it gets to the Netherlands. And I think it's a completely different story. And the challenge was, how do we tell the story of neo-impressionism through themes and through these sort of dialogues across borders and across countries? And I hope, we've risen up to that challenge.
Of course, the exhibition looks great. I also wanted to ask you, and how did the Helena's collecting sort of vision inspire the curation of the exhibition? Because as from what I've understood, she had her own vision of collecting, which was quite revolutionary for her time. How was that implied in the preparation of the exhibition? How was that an inspiration to you?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a multi-part answer to that question. I think she's I mean, to give a bit of background, she's a German-born collector. She's born near Essen. She moves to the Netherlands, inherits huge fortune from her father. So she's very much the money is hers, even though her husband Anton Kröller, builds up the fortune, but she's the one who brings it to the home. And she, of course, there are a lot of collectors who collect things that they like, and then it ends up transforming into a museum, and it's a private collection that evolves into, then later becoming a museum. Helena Kröller-Müller is a different sort of collector because she very quickly, deliberately collects to create a museum for public betterment, if you like, in the great tradition of these early 20th century modernist collections. The collection of Barnes in Philadelphia, for instance, or Osthaus in Hagen, and then in Essen is other example of this sort of collecting. And so it's a very deliberate collecting. Mm-hmm. She's actually, interestingly, Helena Kröller-Müller is probably better known for her collection of Van Gogh. She collects 90 paintings by Van Gogh during her life, the largest collection of Van Goghs until the opening of the Van Gogh Museum in the 1970s. But the other side of that collection is Neo-Impressionism, which she sees as a sort of foil, or if you like, a sort of yin, the yin to the yang of Van Gogh. Van Gogh, she says, is the artist who sort of punches you in the guts. And the Neo-Impressionists are the one that you need to attain a sort of new form of serenity. But what is interesting about her collecting is that she's very deliberate in what she collects. There are things that she does not collect. It's not a comprehensive collection of late 19th, earlier 20th century art. And she's really interested in cerebral artists, much less in sort of the things that she would consider to be more expressive or emotional, say. And so she collects Neo-Impressionism through that lens, as I said at the beginning, as an international movement. So that is particularly interesting in determining what we were trying to do. But she also collects a specific type of Neo-Impressionist painting for the large part. And she tends to collect probably the most radical of those works. I mean, hence the name of the show, Radical Harmony. Works that seek to attain harmony, but in a very radical way. And that, to me, particularly crystallizes at the end of the show, where you see the sort of works that she collects, these really empty, spare landscapes that seem to sort of announce the abstraction of the 20th century. Works where, particularly, we have, works from Graveline, the last series of Georges Seurat's paintings, where you really feel that reality is slowly drifting away and works are becoming much more about line and shape. So I think it allows to tell a story of Neo-Impressionism as, in a way, you could say the first international movement of modern art, which is no mean thing. And that very much comes from the way that she collected internationally these artists. And then also to really be able to demonstrate how Neo-Impressionism is not just about painting with dots. It's not just a little experiment that happens after Impressionism, but it's also this really important step in the emergence of modern art in the 20th century.
And were there any discoveries also when you were preparing the show?
Well, there's always many interesting discoveries that you make, things relating to provenance, to conservation, or all sorts of things like that. I mean, I'll list a few, if you like. I mean, one of the discoveries, one of the drawings that we show in the exhibition that we borrowed, it's a beautiful drawing by a Belgian artist called George Lemon of Jan Toorop, the Dutch, one of the prominent Dutch Neo-Impressionists that I really hope will be a revelation for the London audiences and even audiences more globally when they think of Neo-Impressionism. But we borrowed this drawing from another museum in the Netherlands just because it was a great drawing and it paired well with the works we had in the collection, and then only discovered later on that it actually had belonged to Helena Kröller-Müller, that we had unknowingly brought back one of the works that she had owned. So that was a rather, wonderful, nice discovery, a nice surprise. But, also I think to us was really sort of researching Helena Kröller-Müller in depth and why she collected the works that she did. And a particularly, I think, important revelation, I think, to us, and that's in the catalogue of the show. It was written by, an essay written by Christopher Raphael, the post-1800 curator at the National Gallery. Yes. And that is really about the intellectual underpinnings of Helena Kröller-Müller's collecting, which really links her back to Friedrich Nietzsche, this sense of collecting as for art, for the betterment of humanity. And so they say that that's a little tongue-in-cheekly entitled, Helena Kröller-Müller as Nietzsche's sort of, Übermensch. An interesting concept. But really this sense that she was collecting in this incredibly intellectually rigorous way, that, she's really one of the first people to think of, for instance, Van Gogh as a sort of kindled spirits with a Nietzsche. And that she was really at the vanguard of this sort of deep sort of intellectual thought about art and collecting and how art will play an important role in the betterment of society.
And I wanted to ask you picked Seurat as the sort of centerpiece of the exhibition. I wanted to know why. It's an amazing artwork, but just curious why this artwork is a centerpiece.
Well, it's an exceptional painting. I mean, now, Seurat dies very young. He dies at 31. It's actually his last finished large painting. Seurat is a very ambitious artist. As we know, famously, his most famous large picture is the Afternoon on La Grande Jatte in Chicago. The National Gallery has Bathers at Asnières. But there's only 5 of these large paintings that he calls his toiles de lutte, his battle canvases. They're really the large works in which he was really trying to push the boundaries of art and really express, express himself as the most radical. Works where he's really like taking on like large formats, like really trying to make art for the museums. Really saying, I'm putting myself on an equal footing with the old masters. And so Chahut, the work from Helena Kröller-Müller's collection, is the last of these large paintings. And it's really incredible to be able to see it in London because, or actually anywhere in the world for that matter. It's a work that is traveling for the first time out of the museum in Otello for the first time since 1958, when it was shown at MoMA in New York. So, it's really a bit of a revelation to be able to have it in London, to have it in the same building as one of Seurat's other large paintings. That happens very rarely, that you can have 2 big Seurats in the same place at the same time. And it's a really, really important painting because it's really a work about the artificiality of art in many ways. Really, using, depicting the Chahut is the name of the French can-can, the incredibly, this very naughty dance, very popular dance. And, there's this feeling with that work that he's depicting a very ugly subject in a way. This debauchery in the cabaret, the café concerts in Paris. They had to have policemen sort of make sure that the dancers were wearing underwear when they were performing it. So it's a very sort of ugly thing, supposedly. And you see there's a figure at the back, sort of at the bottom of the work, sort of looking up the women's skirts. So it's an ugly spectacle, the sort of spectacle you'd see in posters in the metro in Paris at that time, for instance. But he brings it up to high art and makes it something beautiful. And also something very artificial, bathed in artificial light, like very ambitious composition. You see one of the figures from the back, like a big part of the picture is the back of a man in sort of shadow. But also I think what is so important about this work, and in a way so moving that it's his last finished painting, because large painting, because what would he have done next? And it's a Belgian critic that says that when the work is shown in Brussels in 1891. And he says, well, maybe this work is just a work for which the subject matter is only a pretext for the exploration of line and color. As in, what's really important about this work is the shapes and the color. So it's a sort of feeling that it's a work that is one step closer to abstraction, where subject matter becomes more and more irrelevant. And so it's so interesting because it's a work that is on the edge of both of these worlds. It's both doing something, of course, very significant visually and narratively, but also it's taking art into a different direction. So it's such a key painting of New Impressionism, but of art in the late 19th century more generally. That it's such such an incredibly generous thing that the Kröller-Müller Museum has done to entrust it with it for a few months in London.
Of course, that's a beautiful painting. As a viewer, the feeling that I got looking at it, as if it's almost, I wouldn't, though the subject is quite sexual, but it's so artistic that it's almost loses this sort of physical sexuality to it, because it's so focused on showing the light and the color, rather than being like just physical.
Absolutely. Well, it really is that feeling that reality is a pretext for that painting. That, I mean, yes, it depicts this sort of morbid thing, this lurid dance, but it's also about a higher thing, both about harmony in painting, about how you can make that ugly scene a beautiful thing, and then also how it can actually be really, it's really a painting about painting as well. So it's a fascinating thing.
And were they, or there are also like lesser known artists that were a bit of the discovery when you were preparing the exhibition?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, I mean, even a discovery for us, curators, I mean, artists that I didn't know, like a Dutch artist called Johan Toornprikker, for instance. We have 3 pastels that he does in 1904, which are like proto-Piet Mondrian-ish, you know, these like dotted pastels that feel like they're really landscapes that are dissolving into nothingness. Really amazing paintings. Someone like Anna Bock, the only woman to paint in the neo-impressionist style, who I barely knew as an artist. She's better known as the only person to buy a Van Gogh during his lifetime, buys it at an exhibition in Brussels, a work called The Red Vineyard, which is at the Pushkin Museum in Moscow now. So that was a big revelation to me, to really research her work and include her into this exhibition. I thought it was very important to make her part of that story. And then, you know, artists which I think I knew a little bit, but I really got to dive into much more preparing the show, which I think will really be a revelation for the London public, which is Jan Toorop, fascinating Dutch artist who's actually Dutch, but he's born in the Dutch colony of Java in modern-day Indonesia, moves to the Netherlands age 11, is really probably one of the first sort of non-Western artists to work in the Western avant-garde, and actually brings into his art some traditional Javanese patterns, particularly when he paints in a more symbolist style. But I think he really will be quite the revelation for the public, and an artist that really, really pushes the boundaries of art into, again, this sort of semi-abstract direction. And then another artist, which I really tried to make, we only have 2 paintings by him and 2 pastels in the exhibition, called Henry van der Velde, who's actually then better known as an architect. He's the architect of the Kröller-Müller Museum, like a really, really important architect of the first half of the 20th century, really radical in establishing, you know, this museum, the Kröller-Müller, which is almost like a prototype for what the white cube was going to become. Very spare interiors, and his work as a painter is truly extraordinary. And I really think he's somebody. We have one late painting from 1889, which is, you know, as daring as Georges Seurat in pushing the bird out towards abstraction, but it's not at all derivative of Seurat, as some people like to read neo-impressionism. Still say, you know, and even you saw that in some of the critical responses to the exhibition, that Seurat's at the very top of the pyramid, and then everybody else is sort of following along. And you look at Van der Velde, and you see that he's taking you into a sort of semi-abstract direction, using a completely different aesthetic, a completely different mode of painting. So that I hope, in many ways was a revelation for me, and will be a revelation for the public.
Yes, it was. For example, for me, it was the first time I see the work of this artist when I was at the opening of your exhibition, and I haven't seen his artwork before myself, and it was a very interesting artwork. I really enjoyed the show, and I really enjoyed the combination of artists like Seurat, and you have some Van Gogh there at the exhibition, and then also, for example, his artworks as well, and like this artist. So again, thank you so much for curating such an amazing show.
Oh, my pleasure. But I think, just to add to that, I think to me it's so important to do shows that speak to the public in the sense that, there's nothing wrong with the public wanting to have some familiarity with what they're going to see. And that's a wonderful way to draw them in, to say, well, there is Georges Seurat that you know well. There is, as you say, a great painting by Van Gogh in the exhibition. But then also use that to open up their horizons and present them to new artists that then we hope in the future, we might be able to show again and build sort of that knowledge. I think it's really important when you create exhibitions to be aware of that, to think, well, what story can we tell that people know, and how can we surprise them?
Of course. I also wanted to congratulate you with one more show that you opened in the summer. Now you're having in parallel in the Royal Academy, which is Kiefer and Van Gogh, which is such an interesting combination, and ask you more about how did this show come together, how was it to collaborate with a living artist, and how where this idea came from.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a great show. It's a show I really enjoyed working on at the Royal Academy. I started working at the RA almost 2 years ago. It's an exhibition I inherited as I moved to the RA, but I really only inherited the title, Kiefer Van Gogh. And then it was up to me to build it. And it was really, for me, a first to work with a living artist. I hope it will happen again, because I truly enjoyed that. Also, it was a great way to take me out of my comfort zone. I'm not used to artists being able to talk back at me. And I say that to Anselm jokingly, when I first met him, I said, well, my artists are usually dead. And he has a good sense of humor, so that amused him greatly. But there, the opportunity, if you like, it's an exhibition that's a collaboration between the Royal Academy and the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. And it really came out of that collaboration, and really out of a series of paintings that Anselm Kiefer paints or makes, because it's much more than just paint on a canvas, that Anselm made in 2019 when he was asked to give a lecture about Van Gogh at Tate Britain, when they did the Van Gogh in Britain exhibition. And his way of processing his thoughts was to paint quite a few large paintings. I mean, I'm talking, 8 meters wide for some of them, to just process his thoughts and really sort of actively think about Van Gogh as he was making work. And those works are rather beautiful, and they're great paintings. There's 3 in the exhibition. And that was the starting point. But then to really think that actually he's an artist who's engaged with Van Gogh through his entire life, who, of course, engages with Van Gogh as a fellow painter. They're both artists who are really interested in texture. But actually, what the exhibition reveals is that fascination, that influence of Van Gogh on Kiefer is much more deep-rooted. And that's what this exhibition tries to explore. I mean, for me, these shows where you bring 2 artists from different eras together are not particularly interesting if what you're trying to say is just, well, they sort of look the same, they do similar things. To me, that it might be compelling visually for a little bit, but it doesn't leave you with much. And I think what really works in this exhibition, actually what I really love in this exhibition, is probably one of the shows I've made that I like the most, is that it shows you that they relate in much more sort of philosophical ways about what it means to be an artist. I think Kiefer really sees in Van Gogh like an artist who struggles. And Kiefer really thinks that art is about struggle. It's about always trying to push further. A work is never quite finished. It's always about what are you going to do next. But I think what works, and I hope what people get from this show, is you might leave the exhibition feeling that you've learned something unexpected about Kiefer because of that juxtaposition with Van Gogh. And same, you might see Van Gogh in a different way by looking at how Kiefer sees his art.
And how do you think it will change the perception of, especially Van Gogh, of the viewers who see it now from the lens of Kiefer, is there any way you think it might change their vision of him? Because
I hope so. Well, I think what might change people's vision, and me as a 19th century curator, and that's very much something me, but especially the curators Chris Raphael and Connie Homburg of the Van Gogh Poets and Lovers show were trying to do at the National Gallery, is to really move away from the myth of Van Gogh, which slightly overwhelms everything. I mean, why he's one of the most famous artists who's ever lived, probably only equaled by sort of someone like Leonardo da Vinci or Andy Warhol, is that he's seen as like the archetypal, bohemian, expressive, like tragic artist, who of course ultimately ends his own life. And that people tend to then forget, that he's fundamentally just a really, really great artist and a very deliberate artist, a very intellectual artist, a very well-read artist. And that is really the way that Anselm Kiefer sees Van Gogh. And actually, is sort of one of the first things that he told me when I met Kiefer, where he said, and that's a quote that we have in the exhibition at the very beginning of the show. He says, reflecting on himself as a teenager, going on this sort of voyage of discovery, following in Van Gogh's footsteps. That's a sort of starting point conceptually of the show. A voyage he takes at 18. And he reflects back on it and says, contrary to what might expect of a teenager, I wasn't interested in the dramatic aspect of Van Gogh's life. What interested me was the rational structure of his work. And what I really hope what seeing Van Gogh through Kiefer's eyes, I really hope enables the audience to really connect to Van Gogh as a great, very deliberate artist, not as somebody who, like in the public imagination, goes out in the countryside with a canvas, puts it on the easel and just paints his feelings and his heart out on paint in a sort of loose, uncontrolled sort of way. And actually, there's, of course, it's a very expressive style of painting, but it's also very deliberate. He really is an artist, thinking as an artist, building his oeuvre in a very deliberate way. And I think, to me, that Kiefer really enables us to tell that story.
And was there anything personal that also that inspired you when you were preparing this exhibition, like something personal that you learned about both of the artists that you can share with us?
Oh gosh, well, so many. Some things I'll have to keep to myself.
No, of course.
But no, I think spending time with Anselm Kiefer and with his wonderful team, Waltraud and Lucas and Laura, really, he surrounded himself with a really remarkable group of people. Very generous, incredibly intelligent, and who really understand his work very deeply. I think, to me, is sort of there's a work in the last room of the show called the Last Load. That's probably in the exhibition the most sort of classically Kiefer. It's a panoramic landscape, sort of about 7.5 meters wide by 2.5 high, of a field which is burnt, like with these deep sort of like furrows in the soil, and like a very dark painting. Like you look at it and you're like, there's a lot of angst coming out of that picture. And I remember when we opened the show, and Anselm was there with us, and we looked at that painting together, and he said something I thought was so meaningful and so very much Kiefer. And he said, look, I look at this landscape, and I can't look at any landscape without thinking of the great tragedy that's happened within it. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty dark view of the world. And I mean, especially, today it's hard not to have a very dark view of the world, right? In many ways. But then he said, but look, especially I think that comes out seeing next to Van Gogh, who's also, of course, tormented in many ways, but also very optimistic artist. And so Kiefer said, well, it's a bit like Van Gogh. If you look at that field, yes, it's a miserable thing in front of us. It's very bleak, but in a few weeks or a few months, the grass will have grown again. The field will be beautiful again. There will be new life. There's always new life. There's always cyclicality. And he's like, and so this is also in many ways an optimistic work. It really is about the way that you decide to look at it. It is about renewal. And I think so for me personally, it was sort of being able to see Kiefer's work through a much more optimistic lens as well. That he's not necessarily the way that we see him purely as this very, very dark, very, very broody artist, but that actually there is always this feeling of hope on the other side, and that is also something you see in Van Gogh. It is very hopeful type of painting.
Well, thank you so much, and that still is a very beautiful. It was a very beautiful answer to a very beautiful show that's
Thank you.
still happening in the Royal Academy. I actually also wanted to ask you some more questions about your other show that was happening in the Royal Academy earlier. I think it was there about a year ago, as I remember, and it was one of the show. Well, I also really enjoyed Van Gogh and Kiefer and the show that's now in the National Gallery, but this one was really something that I fell in love with when I came there. So how was curating Michelangelo, Da Vinci and Raphael in the Royal Academy? What fresh perspectives did it give you to the artists?
Well, that was a dream exhibition. I must not take too much credit for that exhibition. I got to do the most fun bit, which was to actually hang it. And I got to do that with my predecessor and friend and colleague Per Romberg, who was my predecessor at the Royal Academy, who moved to be the head of Curatorial, the Jacob Rothschild head of the Curatorial department at the National Gallery. And so the show was very much his vision, and we got to work on it together in sort of the latter stage and really working on what it would look like on the walls, and a really wonderful way of being able to tell a very specific story of Florence around 1504, the moment in time where these three sort of giants, it's often rare to have two giants together in the same place at the same time, but actually in Florence around 1504, there were the three of them, Michelangelo, Leonardo, and Raphael at very different stages in their careers, but to be able to show how they related through their works and how they encourage one another, how they, it's not that they copied one another directly. Even the young Raphael, when you see him, there was a wonderful bit in the show where you saw the Tadei Tondo, the only Michelangelo sculpture in the country, which actually is in the collection of the Royal Academy. And we showed next to it a little sketch that Raphael does, where he must have encountered the Tondo in person in the house of Taddeo Taddei, who commissioned the Tondo from Michelangelo. And you see him sort of sketch it. You feel you're in that moment, and then you see how he, sort of copies it, but very quickly changes it to make one of his most important early works, the Bridgewater Madonna. So it was able to show, through these incredibly important works, the majority of them drawings, the artists interacting with one another. And it was quite magical in the way that it seemed to bring those interactions alive. And you seemed to sort of see them in front of you. You almost felt like you were looking over the artist's shoulders as they were looking at each other's work.
Yeah, I remember this moment in the exhibition where you would have those two works together, and I think you had quite a few various drawings together from different artists to see how they were looking at each other. Were there any challenges of putting those works together that you faced?
Well, gosh, it's always again, every exhibition is a challenge for many, many ways. This exhibition, the most challenging thing, of course, was it's a collection of drawings. So it's an exhibition of drawings by very major artists. Drawings are very, very fragile. The case for Van Gogh drawings in Kiefer Van Gogh, or drawings in this show. So the big challenge was to be able to borrow great drawings from great collections from these three great artists, and to manage to convince museums that if they were going to lend you one of these drawings, it's when you lend an important, well, actually any drawing for that matter, if you show it in an exhibition for 3.5, 4 months, like we do at low light levels, but the work will have to then spend about 5 years in the dark. So it's asking a lot of a collection to entrust you with basically like 5 years of this work's existence with an audience. I mean, the ability of an audience to look at it. And so that was the challenge of this show. But the concept that my fellow co-curators, Per Bromberg and Scott were able to come up with was such a compelling story that it made it very easy to lend to. The Royal Collection was able to lend like a dozen great drawings by Leonardo da Vinci gladly to make the show happen.
Thank you for your answer. And I wanted to ask you, you curated and co-curated some of the most visited and successful exhibitions in the past few years. So what do you think is the secret of making an exhibition so appealing to the public?
That's a very good question. I think I mean there's a few things. I mean, at first it's you really, I'm a curator who really, I mean, not that I'm saying that this is not the case with some of my colleagues, not at all, but I really, really think of the audience and the audience experience. Like I've come to curating as a sort of frustrated academic who wanted to speak to a broader audience and share my enthusiasm for art, and particularly works of art as physical objects in front of you, which is what we do as a curators. It's being there mediating between the original work and the audience, and making them realize just how extraordinary looking at the real thing actually is. Just in the age of images and social media, and is particularly difficult at times. But so for me, like the way an exhibition would relate to an audience is really, really key. And while some people might find that doing a show that speaks to the audience might be maybe compromising like the intellectual or the academic integrity of an exhibition, I really don't believe that it is. I really think you can do, and the time is ripe to do shows about great, well-known artists and movements, shows that an audience would feel familiar with, would want to come see, and it's possible to look at these artists and say something new and challenge their perceptions. So it's almost finding the hook to invite them in, and then blow their minds. Really is the idea. So I think that is sort of my philosophy of making exhibitions. That's what I enjoy doing in exhibitions. There's nothing more I enjoy than to see a lot of people in an exhibition I've curated. But more than the numbers, also, I think what I try to do in my shows is to really create the sort of environment where people will feel compelled with really spending quality time, if you will, one-on-one or two-on-one with a picture or a sculpture, and really take time to look at it. And so much more than large crowds of people in a show, what I really enjoyed seeing in the Florence show at the DRA, or indeed in Kiefer Van Gogh, or in Radical Harmony at the National Gallery, is to see really people taking time looking. And yeah, to me, it's really to see how do you create that environment, how do you build a sort of narrative through an exhibition that both helps the public know where they're going, but also enables them to, or rather makes them want to look at the works and to engage with the works visually, and think and write their own story. So those are the little tricks of the trade, if you like, the things I enjoy doing in an exhibition to encourage close looking. But I think, yes, to me, it's really about sharing one's enthusiasm for these great things.
And the curation of the exhibition changed a lot in the past 15 years. How do you think it will change in the future? What are the, you think the direction the curation might take and the way how exhibitions would be presented might take in the future years?
Well, I think for a variety of reasons, the shape of exhibitions is changing quite drastically. I mean, to not be political, but it's impossible not to be political about these sort of things. You know, when you see what's happening in the US at the moment, the huge cuts to art funding, how art has become a political toy for those in power in Washington. It's becoming really tough to make exhibitions in the US. And one collaborates a lot with institutions in America, so that will just be a challenge in the days that are coming. And that's not at all, you know, they're great colleagues in the US, but it's becoming very, very difficult to make shows there. It's, again, for a variety of reasons, becoming more and more difficult to make shows. Art is harder to borrow, ever more expensive to insure, more expensive to transport. So I think exhibitions will have to be more and more deliberate. But I think, so, you know, you really have to, the works you borrow will be fewer, and you really have to get them to do more in the exhibition. But again, I feel for me, because I think there's no point flying a work from the other side of the world with the ecological consequences that we know, if you're not really making a case for it and really enabling the audience to look at it. So I think exhibitions will be smaller in numbers of works in them. But again, I think that's not a bad thing. If people really engage with, say, 100 works in a big RA show rather than 150 or 200, I think that's an equally valuable experience. But I think, to me, and I find that's a very positive change or evolution in exhibition making, is that one has to be ever more collaborative making shows. It's increasingly difficult for a museum, and that's true of the Royal Academy or of the National Gallery, to go and do an exhibition on your own. And so you really have to collaborate with colleagues, and that is something you now do for every single show, which is a great joy, because I've become a curator because I like working with other people and collaborating with others. But I think that's really a change, and that will build up sort of more and more, you know. But Kiefer Van Gogh is a collaboration with the Van Gogh Museum, Radical Harmony with the Kröller-Müller, a show we're doing next year in the spring, which is opening in a few days in Vienna, is a collaboration, is a show called Michelangelo, a collaboration with the Kunsthistorisches Museum.
I think I'm going to go and see it quite soon.
Well, I hope you enjoy it. You'll see it. Well, see it in both places, because it will really be a stunning exhibition. So it's really it will be much more about collaborating with international colleagues, which I think is a wonderful thing.
And if you would curate a dream show, which show would it be?
Oh, how long do you have to answer that question? Well, I have many. There's an idea that I keep on returning to, which I would so love to curate. And if anybody listening to this wants to do it with me, get in touch. It's something I've been interested about for as long as I've been an art historian and a curator, and it's the idea of late style. The idea that, and you see it throughout art history, of artists getting old, and in old age achieving a sort of new feeling of freedom in their work, and often a moment where they push the boundaries of what art is and can be. And you see that, famously with Titian, late Titian. You can say, if you look at The Death of Actaeon at the National Gallery, a late Titian painting from around 1570, you could say is one of the first time that painting becomes about painting. That's the subject of it. And that, in old age, you feel sort of so liberated and compelled. But you see that in late Rembrandt. You see such great freedom in late works by Degas or Monet. And so to me, it would be this dream exhibition bringing these incredibly beautiful, very important works together to look at what it means to get old as an artist, and how some artists are able actually to draw incredible energy and creativity out of that.
But would it be more of an artist getting to a certain age and liberating themselves, or artists getting to a certain age and completely changing the direction, like Goya, for example?
Yeah, absolutely too. Yeah, I mean, there are different ways that late style can express itself. Absolutely, but it would really be, I think, it would be such a compelling exhibition if you could look at it across 500 years of art. You know, and you know, it's an excuse to do something I've always hoped to do, and something is very difficult to do when you you know, you're dealing with such important artists. But to, for instance, see you know, a late Titian next to a late Degas together, works that, you know, are united by the fact that it is that sort of pursuit of pushing the boundaries of what art can be.
That's beautiful. That's an amazing idea. And once you've mentioned the term curator of the 21st century, can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Well, I suppose it's what I was saying, to think that we're really in an age where we take for granted about works of art in museums. We cannot take for granted anymore, namely the fact that, you know, museums are extraordinary places because they're places where people, and a place like the National Gallery for free, a place like the RA and our collection galleries for free as well, and in great exhibitions where you can come and see the real thing, great works of art. And you actually realize that in the 21st century, this is a notion we can no longer take for granted, as in there is such a proliferation of images. Works of art are achieving such huge prices, unreasonable prices at auction. You know, you'd be hard pressed to find a Van Gogh that doesn't sell for less than 100 million, probably, you know, 150 million by the time some people listen to this or would look and listen at this recording. And I remember it was quite, you know, at the National Gallery, I always, when I was working there, always enjoyed sitting at the visitor's desk a few times, you know, during my time there, and just asking people what they come and see. And there was a comment that would come back recurrently, where people would say, you know, I'd ask them, what did you enjoy? What did you come see today? What did you enjoy? And they'd say, well, I came to see The Virgin of the Rocks, or I came to see The Sunflowers by Van Gogh. It's probably the most frequent answer. But very often they would say, oh, but I came to see it, it was great, but it's a shame that it's not the original. And I would look at them and say, no, but it is. And they would say, no, it can't be. Like, why would such an important work, such an expensive work be there? You could visit it for free. And to me, it was really, wow, like we actually have a lot of work to do. We cannot take for granted that, you know, yes, this is not, that people will assume that this is the original. So I think it's quite a sort of existential situation for curators and museums, where we really have to make clear and intelligible that we are this extraordinary place where extraordinary works of art, and people can have this one-on-one relationship with original works of art, with the very pigments that Van Gogh painted on the canvas, or that Anselm Kiefer painted on his great scale landscapes, or the same with Seurat. Or that it's really the place where you can commune with the great original work of art. And I think, to me, that is the challenge for curators in the 21st century.
And what are the tools one could use in such a challenge to tell a more broader audience you curating that these works are actually original and that they just can come and see them? What do you think a curator could do about it?
Well, I think it's to really, and it's going to sound quite simple. It's not simple at all, actually, and requires a lot of work and determination, but it's really to make collections and exhibitions ever more accessible, ever more sort of stimulating, to not see, you know, popularity of certain things, or the hooks that you might have to use to bring audiences in as a negative thing or something that compromises curatorial or academic integrity, and it really doesn't have to be. But it is really to create these compelling stories that speak to people today. And actually, there's this feeling that only contemporary art can connect to new generations and new audiences because it is about the art today. Mm-hmm. But actually, there's so much and you know that yourself, right? Being surrounded by the art of the past, actually how compelling these more historic works of art can be. And that just one has to be there to give people the tools to be able to engage with them, to understand them, and then to make it their own. That's really the tools that we need to use.
Of course. Julian, I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to become a curator? Why art history? Why this period? What was the moment that inspired your person in your childhood? How did you come to this?
That's a good question. I mean, art has always been in my life. I mean, I come from a very artistic family. My mum studied at the École des Beaux-Arts. I think brought me to see. She always likes to say she took me to see a Matisse exhibition when I was 3 months old. So every time I show a Matisse, she says, "Well, it's because I took you when you were 3 months old." My father worked in the arts, so my brother is still to this day an artist and winemaker and makes wine as a sort of art form. So I've always been seeped in it very deeply, and art is always something that meant a lot to me. But then it was encounters with great shows in Paris, in London, in New York, when I was younger. And then really, as is in all professions, I suppose, the people that you meet and the people that encourages you, great supervisor in Cambridge, Jean-Michel Massin, Chris Raphael, the curator of post-1800 paintings at the National Gallery, that gave me my first job, that allowed me to curate my first exhibition on Edgar Degas about a decade ago. So it's all these things that sort of build you up. So both a passion for the things and for transmitting that knowledge and that enthusiasm, but also some sort of key people along the way that have encouraged me and made me feel like this was something I could be good at.
So, and by the way, congratulations with this show of Edgar Degas as well. I think I have seen it too some years ago, an amazing show. So would you say that Chris Raphael and your professor in Cambridge, they were your sort of mentors?
Oh, absolutely. And Chris is a very generous and very modest person, and he always sort of shies away when I remind him and say thank you. No, but he well and truly is. I mean, I'll never forget being asked in a very casual way, "Oh, do you want to curate that Degas show? Are you?" And me saying, "Well, let me think. Yes." And it's just the greatest thing when someone just believes in you and says, "Well, if you want to, do it. We'll drop you at the deep end, and I'll be there to catch you if you fall. But otherwise, just do it and enjoy it." And it's this sort of chance encounters, and I think I've been very, very lucky to get to work with him from the get-go.
And if not art history, is there anything else what you would do in your life, or just art history?
No, there are many things. I sometimes, it's being a curator is a wonderful job, but also, the state museums are in and art institutions are in at the moment, so it can also be excruciatingly frustrating at times. And so you end up musing, I don't know, there's every art historian or curator in a way, I'm sure, has an artistic temperament and would have thought what it would have been like to work as an artist. Filmmaking is something I've been interested for a long time. I had a small career as a aspiring filmmaker, where actually another mentor to me, very important person to me, the film director James Ivory, was really crucial in that part of my life, and actually also then in becoming an art historian, because he's somebody who's so interested in culture and art as well. So there's these different things, but I feel very content being a curator and an art historian.
That's great. And what would you tell for example, a young person studying art history who wants to become curator in the future? Is there any advice you could give for someone to become such a successful curator as yourself, curating so many shows, who has worked in such great institutions? And
But it's kind of you to say, it always feels like an immense privilege, and it always feels like it's something that is not a given. Like it's not, you always feel like you're very lucky, like it might not, that stroke of luck to be able to carry these great shows like might sort of, run out. It's not something you take for granted. And I think I'd say to that you really have to have a great sort of passion for it, and a passion for the art, and a passion for art as physical objects in front of you, and a passion for audiences, and great curiosity as well. I think what is wonderful about being a curator is you both have to train as an art historian and develop a specialism, and that's really important, and that's what I tell aspiring curators, like go and spend time really digging deeply in something and enjoy it, but then also keep open-minded that, when you become a curator, even if you're a 19th century specialist like me, for instance, you will work on Renaissance Florence, and you get to relish doing that, and then get to relish working with someone like Kiefer. So you have to keep very open-minded. And then also, it's a tough profession. It's one where there are very few like entry-level jobs, and you have to be very determined and very sort of thick-skinned, and be willing to not take myriad rejections personally, and just keep at it, keep determined, go see a lot of shows, and then sort of keep that passion flowing. I think is really, really key, and really and it's really, I think, something to be a successful curator. You really have to enjoy working with others. And the fact it's a profoundly collaborative endeavor, not only with fellow curators in other institutions, like I said, but also with all sorts of departments in an institution, all working at their best to contribute to the many, many different layers of that project. And, and as a curator, it's really also about recognizing and valuing everybody's expertise. So it's relishing in how multifaceted the making of exhibitions can be.
thank you very much for your answer. And thank you everyone for watching us. And have a great afternoon, everyone. Please follow for more art news. Thank you, Julian, for
Thank you very much,
coming.
Daria.